Want one? I'll get it for you. The last one.
You're on camera.
Yay! Thank you.
And I will be adding a few slides to that one towards the back.
Okay.
But probably next week, but we'll see. I got exactly 0 of my to-do items done today.
Right. I felt that way too.
It's just one of those days. And Monday I was going to take the day off and do a little bit of work on stuff. And then I ended up spending about 5 hours dealing with something that someone put on my plate. And it wasn't someone I could just say, no, I won't do that. So it was someone where when they tell you to do something, okay, when? What about this afternoon? Okay.
I didn't know you had people like that in your life.
I do have people like that in my life. I exist in a bureaucratic church. And so I have actual bosses. And they do have power. Now, I have a guaranteed appointment because I am an elder.
Oh.
So they must give me an appointment. I mean, short of bringing charges against me or something. They must give me an appointment. But then it must be a full-time appointment. But unless I agree. Well, actually, I think if I go less than full-time, all of the pastors in the conference have to vote to let me do that. That's to protect me against vindictive bishops and stuff. You know. But they don't say that they have to give me a good appointment or an appointment close to anyone I know or or anything like that. So they could give me 4 churches that are an hour apart in northwest Nebraska.
But can't they do that?
Although it'd be pretty up there.
Normally, anyway? I mean, that's the thing I've always wondered
Well, they
about.
could, but and we're on FaceTime, so I'm going to be careful
Okay.
how I talk. But I mean, I'm pretty open with the hierarchy. But someone like me, who's relatively competent, and most of the people in my churches usually like me, and I have gone into lots of churches that are in crisis and leave with them not in crisis. Not always having grown lots of people, but at least, like one church I went into, they were overdrawn in their bank account and they had about $800 worth of bills to pay that week, and they had a negative balance. And by the time I left, and that was that was right before, that was in 2007. And so in 2008, when everything crashed, we ran a surplus. They hadn't paid their apportionments in years, and they paid it in full then and every year since. When you have that kind of a reputation, they don't want to lose you or tick you off. I mean, seriously, they want to take care of you. Mm-hmm. Plus, I have a DS who is a very good DS. Probably the
That's
best.
important.
She is probably the best district superintendent I have ever had. And she and I like each other. We consider each other friends. So, she's still my supervisor, but she's going to take care of me. I don't even have to think about it. I know she's going to take care of me. I don't know the new bishop. He just started, so. But he has a good reputation. And the other 2 bishops I've been under, both have known and liked me and would never do anything to harm me. So I don't worry about that kind of stuff. But if I were to tick off the hierarchy, they could do all kinds of things to me. They could send me back down to southwest Kansas.
Which probably isn't any better than northwest Nebraska.
It's warmer. It's warmer in the winter,
Yeah, that's true.
but there's a lot more blowing dirt.
Yeah.
There's just no. I mean, there are entire counties in northwest Nebraska that don't have post offices.
Mm-hmm. And they're the biggest counties in the state.
Yeah, I mean, they're
But he's
huge.
populated. Right?
There's
I mean,
more
it's just
cattle than
huge.
people.
Yeah.
I mean, our great Northwest district takes up a third of Nebraska. 1DS over it, and
Oh my.
she just drives all the time. I mean, she go from Chadron down to what's that? The town there on 80 just before you go over into Wyoming?
Oglala.
No, past that. Way past that. Way past.
Gehring?
No.
Mm-mm. I don't live
I don't
up
know.
there. I live in my own little world.
You live in your own little world? Okay. So, well, none of you have food tonight, so let's pray. Our dear Lord God, we thank you and we praise you for your word and for the things that you teach us and do for us and give us. And we just ask that you would open that word to us this evening so that we might better understand your ways as we study. We just turn this time over to you, trusting that you will lead us and guide us. In Jesus' name, amen.
No.
So let's go back and do just a bit of quick review. As we were just getting into the meat of this section. And you'll remember that we are at the climax of Revelation now, but the climax falls in three parts. So you have the part of the prostitute of Babylon, who is Babylon really, and that's all associated with the dragon and the beast and the fallen rebellious realm. And then after that, there's going to be a section on judgment, and then after that is a section on the New Jerusalem and the redeemed. Those are the redeemed. And one of the things that I have that I warned you last week, and I want to reiterate this week, is be careful that you don't get into a chronological mindset when you go through this, because there are lots of indications, and we went through one of them last week where John falls down and worships the angel, both at the end of this part of the vision where he's talking about the prostitute, and then when he gets done talking about the bride, he falls down and worships the angel. And it does not make sense to think that John would have fallen down and worshipped the angel and been rebuked and said, don't do that, and then 10 minutes later fall down and worship the angel, to be rebuked to not do it. He seems to be signaling that one incident that was one incident, and he had this big revelation of fallen Babylon because of the judgment, and the New Jerusalem because of the judgment. So he's trying to describe it, just like if you were to try to describe this room, you might describe the floors and the walls and stuff like that. And then you might go back and describe the tables and the chairs, and this. Then you might go back and describe the things on the walls, and then you might describe the people, or you might start with the people. But really and truly, when you sweep around, you see all of it at once. But you're not going to be able to write it down all at once. So remember that kind of thing. So as we go here in Revelation 17, 1 and 2, we have this image of the prostitute. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of sexual immorality, and those who live on the earth became drunk with the wine of her sexual immorality." When we go into 21, which is still part of the climax, we get the image of the bride. And I just want you to compare those two. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I will show you the bride and the wife of the Lamb." And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. So you have prostitutes, you have a bride. Prostitutes associated with Babylon, which is fallen. Bride is associated with, and actually as you go through, you figure out that these images just kind of meld into the identity of the cities and of New Jerusalem. And really what's being signaled here is that human community is shaped by things like values and structures and dynamics and social life and stuff like that. But really and truly, the core identity to humanity is their relationship to God. What's your relationship to God? And John is saying, in the past he's been saying things like you're either a citizen of fallen Babylon or you're a citizen of the New Jerusalem or something like that, or you're the faithful or the unfaithful. But here he says you're either a prostitute or Jesus' wife. You're one or the other. So he's using sexual imagery to get that across. And so, but what we see here is that it's the relationship that's important. Our relationship with God. And the prostitute blasphemes the relationship with God and builds her life on an adulterous relationship with the one who usurps the husband's rightful place. So she builds her relationship with the dragon, Satan, who is trying to overthrow Jesus, the groom, and the bride is saying, no, I am the bride to Jesus. And so the bride is accepting that relationship with the Lamb. And this is the kind of imagery that he's using. It's pretty lurid imagery, actually, when you start reading it. I can imagine it's less shocking to us than it would have been to John's first readers. They would have probably, although Roman culture was pretty lurid. And so, and temple prostitutes were normal, and you could probably go by any number of temples in most of your towns, and maybe even actually see temple prostitutes doing their thing with worshipers, and sexuality and worship were one and the same in a lot of the parts. And now, the prostitute is seated on many waters. The waters which you saw where the prostitute sits are the peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And so, again, there's that revelation imagery of waters, seas, and things like that often have to do with people, with humans. And we use that imagery too, the sea of humanity and stuff like that. So that kind of imagery shouldn't be too surprising to you. But he just makes it explicit here. We're dealing with all kinds of people, all kinds of multitudes, all kinds of nations, and all kinds of languages. And the prostitute is sitting by these waters or on these waters to represent everything that shapes humans in rebellion against God. Back in verse 3, we see that John sees a consolidation of the dragon with the beast. He carried me away in the spirit to a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. This is just a consolidation of the dragon and the beast, because the dragon is scarlet, is red. The beast wasn't identified as such. The beast had the blasphemous names, and both of them had the 7 heads and 10 horns. And so the beast has only been a manifestation of the dragon all along, is really what he's trying to convey there, is that all of these images we've been having, he's just going to mash them all up together, because he says there's really no reason to talk about them separately. They're all the same. It's all of the fallen world is just enlivened by, shaped by, and driven by Satan, the beast, or the dragon. And fallen Babylon is the center of human existence in rebellion against God. And it rests firmly on the dragon's rebellion and the beast's incarnation of that rebellion in a framework that blasphemes God and God's realm. And this has been the case from the beginning, and it's still the case. All of the fallen world anything you want to consider the fallen world, anything outside of the realm of God, and that might include portions of the church, unfortunately, it rests on the dragon's rebellion, Satan's rebellion. And remember chapter 12, it talks about that rebellion and how Satan and his angels who came with him, the angels who came with him, about a third of them, it appears, were driven out of heaven, and they're here on earth trying to cause havoc, and there's still this delusional idea that Satan will eventually take over the realm of God, although that never happened. It will never happen. But your own self-deception can take you a long way. And so he still has that kind of an idea. Now, if you'll notice, the prostitute has a specific kind of clothing, and it represents political power and economic wealth. Look at it. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, holding in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her sexual immorality. And so it was only the ruling classes in the Roman Empire who were allowed to wear purple. It was illegal for anyone else to wear purple. Scarlet clothing was incredibly expensive, so only wealthy people could have that. And of course, gold and jewels would also be something that only the wealthy would be able to take care of. And her cup's gold; it's a golden cup. And so everything here, when you start looking at this woman, this prostitute, she looks really pretty attractive. She looks like someone you might want to get along with. She has a lot of political power. She has a lot of wealth. She has a lot to offer you, along with venereal disease, death. And this is the case from a distance. Prostitutes may look really nice. To get up close, and so she appears desirable. But when you look at her cup, and you look what she has in her cup, you begin to see the true nature of this prostitute, the refreshment that she offers the world, the refreshment that she offers people in life. Would you close that door, please? Thank you. Is the unholiness of her fornication, resulting in all sorts of abominations and the unclean things of her sexual immorality. So the prostitute here not only represents political and economic might, but it's something that's going to result in some really bad stuff for people. But she also represents spiritual might, because it appears that at least in some ways she's victorious over the saints. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus, and when I saw her, I wondered greatly. Well, I wonder greatly too, because those who resist her harlotries, those who resist her immorality, her lack of faithfulness to the bridegroom, Jesus, well, they're killed. Or at least some of them are killed. And if they're not physically killed, although, as I said last week, there were more people in the 20th century, and again in the 21st century it's continuing to increase. There are more people being killed today for their faith in Jesus than at any other moment in history. We look back at the great persecutions of Rome that kind of surround this, that haven't broken out entirely yet, but have broken out in bits and pieces throughout the empire. But she likes to kill her saints. And then all you have to do is look back through Bible stories. Look at Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Look at Daniel. Look at the prophets. They were all killed, or most of them were killed. Elijah and Elisha weren't, but a bunch of the other. The king took Isaiah. The tradition, Jewish tradition, is that he took Isaiah and put him in a hollowed out log and then put him through a sawmill. And so, really wonderful, wonderful things. If you want to know about the ways that she kills the saints, I recommend you read Fox's Book of Martyrs. There are others, but that would be a good place to start. And where, it talks about grilling people on open fire grills and all kinds of other things. But this is what's happened, and here's the deal. This is evil killing righteousness. It appears that she has a lot of power here. The perspective of the whole earth that appears to be true. Eli and I looked at this just a few minutes ago. Here's how the people of the world talk about her and the beast. They worship the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with him? Indeed, who is able to wage war with him? He's so powerful. I mean, you look at the evil in the world. Are you going to overcome it? Are you even going to survive it? There's a lot of power there. And so she's drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And he says he wonders. He wonders greatly at this. And like I said, there are examples of martyrdom throughout church history. Even so-called free nations like the United States and European nations are moving against expressions of Christianity. All you have to do is look around, and you can see it. That there are various ways, and sometimes it's non-governmental, and sometimes it's actual governmental movements against Christianity. And John has seen in human history that fallen Babylon thinks it can eradicate Christians, or even the existence of the church. Soviet Union tried to do it. The communist China is still trying to do it. Muslim nations are trying to do it. Because it's the expression of God's faithfulness and God's holiness which shows them to be lacking and shows up the brokenness in their system and makes them, it shakes the very foundations of Satan's kingdom. And so they don't want that. And so when you see those kinds of things, you realize that this is the beast system erupting again in our own nation. It's erupting. And we stand as a disturbing and destructive reminder to fallen Babylon that their values are dehumanizing and against God's ways. And so, but they're drunk with our blood. They love it when they can do something to us. And I don't mean any individual person necessarily, although there are individual people. But the whole system loves it when it can get an upper hand of us. And so John's amazed, and following John's amazement at the seemingly invincible power of the prostitute, the angel says, wait a minute. The foundation on which the prostitute sits is really flawed, because she's sitting on the back of the beast. He's already told us that. We've already seen that. But then when you look, it says, the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I'll tell you a mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who live on the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they come and see the beast that he was and is not, and will come. And so the angel explains a mystery, but he explains the mystery with another kind of mystery, a kind of enigma. It's kind of riddle language. And much of our confusion here when we read this arises because John is presenting the vision sequentially, but he experienced the whole thing all at once, in a flash. And one of the consequences of the victory of Christ is the binding and destruction of Satan to the abyss. You can see that over in chapter 20. We'll jump over there now. We'll study it in more detail later. But we need to jump over and see this. He took hold of the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And so Satan's bound by God. And so this is one of the consequences of the victory of Christ, quite frankly, on the cross and in resurrection. But we see in chapter 20, verse 7, that Satan's released. When the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison. So he's released, so he is, but then he is not, because he's been bound into the pit. But then he's going to be, because he's going to be released at the end of this 1,000 years. And we'll talk about the 1,000 years in a little bit. In a few weeks. And because it's in chapter 20. But then almost immediately after he's released, he's cast into the lake of fire. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And so you can't read chapter 17 and 18, you can't read about the prostitute and what's going on without also reading and understanding the judgment that happens here. And the dragon, the dragon, he's thrown out of heaven. We saw that in chapter 12. He roams around the world trying to destroy God's people and the things of God. In fact, the whole system that rests on the dragon's back is drunk with the blood of the saints. He is going to be destroyed, and there is debate amongst people whether that's something that's already happened or something that's going to happen. I would say that it's not happened yet, is my read of it, but I don't argue with people who think that everything at the crucifixion took care of that, and he's actually, I just see too much of him around to accept that. But then after he's going to be released, but then he's only going to be released in order to be judged eternally. And there's a reason for that kind of a thing. And so when you start reading that, then when John talks about the dragon, the beast was and was not and is to come, well, it starts to make sense. There's this whole judgment thing going on, which we'll get to in detail later. So let's look at Rome a little bit, because Rome is important to John's perspective of what's going on, because this is the manifestation of the beast in John's day. In Daniel's day, it was Babylon and then Persia. Daniel lived through two of them. But in John's day, it is Rome. And I show this particular picture of Rome because it shows the 7 hills that Rome's built on. Rome was built on 7 specifically named hills. The maps will vary a little bit, but they're the same hills. And so you see all of those hills there. So here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains upon which the woman sits. And they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes he must remain a little while. So in Revelation, verses 9 and 10, 17, 9 and 10, the angel is providing John with some historic details of the vision for John's day. We can get some things out of it, but this is really for John's day right here. The 7 hills are the 7 hills in which Rome was built. John knew that. Everyone knew that. And so the 7 heads are the 7 mountains. And Rome was built on those. So this is an indication to us and to John that Rome is a historic manifestation of the beast at that time. Now, in the fluidity of the imagery, the 7 heads become 7 kings, too. And so, realize that this is a crazy vision that John is seeing. And so the 7 heads or 7 hills are 7 kings. And he says of the kings, 5 have fallen. But which 5? And if the angel has given John historic manifestation of the beast in his day, where does that count begin? What actually is happening. We can look at the list of emperors of Rome, and if we begin with Julius Caesar in 49 BC through 44 BC, then the reign of Augustus, if it's extended back through the triumvirate, there were 3. Augustus was involved with this, but there were 3 competing emperors for a while after Julius Caesar was assassinated. That would make the 5th Claudius. And then the sixth would be the presently reigning one in this particular time that John is having his vision and writing. And that would be Nero, and he's already indicated with the 666 that he's talking about Nero. And so, and if you had a division of the great city into three parts, remember back in Revelation 16 it talked about the city falling into three parts. Following Nero's suicide, there was a civil war that divided Rome into three warring factions. So this listing of emperors makes sense. I'm not going to die on the hill that this is what he's talking about, but it seems to make the most sense of anything. So the beast itself, represented by its heads, becomes the kings. The beast which was and is not in himself also an eighth, and is one of the seven, and he goes to destruction. So now all of a sudden there's an eighth head. But it's the entire beast. So again, allow for John's imagery that he's seen here, and allow for John trying to figure out how to write all this down in Greek, in language for people to understand what he saw. It may have taken him a long time. We do know from what John wrote that John is pulling heavily from Greek mythology and even more heavily from Old Testament imagery to try to describe what he's describing, because how else would you do it? And so really what we see here, if we have these seven, but the beast is really the eighth, or a continuation of this, then the entire Roman Empire is an example of the beast. The entire Roman Empire. But it's incomplete, because the sixth king presently reigns, not the seventh, but the beast is the eighth going on. And so the beast somehow comes into picture as this eighth that belongs to the seven but goes away into destruction. And the Roman Empire in its present manifestation of power and might, well, John's being told and John's telling his people, it's going to die. It's doomed. It's going to destruction. The Romans won't be always around to control things. And so this seems to be substantiated by the next explanation that the angel gives in verses 12 and 13. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. So the reign of the 7 kings is going to be replaced by the reign of 10 kings, and they're going to give their power and authority to the beast. But they're not permanent. They only get their kingship for an hour, for a short period of time. And so it's exaggerated imagery here that we're seeing of how weak and limited the historic manifestations of the beast are. I mean, you think about it, as great and powerful as the Assyrian Empire was kind of the building of this in modern-ish times. But the Babylonian Empire was so powerful and so wealthy, and it fell because during a drunken party, no one was around to watch as someone dammed the flow of the Euphrates River through the town. I mean, that's it. And it was down. And so you have the Greek Empire, that was the fastest grown empire in history, and probably still in history. It fell into 4 pieces because the ruler died. It was really only Alexander the Great that held it together. And the Roman Empire then starts to disintegrate from within, first off, and they fight and they have civil war, and then you have Eastern and Western, and then you have the Huns who come down and start attacking the western part of it, and eventually then, in the 700s, you have the Ottoman Empire coming up and taking over the eastern side of it, and it falls relatively quickly. I mean, now there's a fiction of the Holy Roman Empire that is maintained by the Catholic Church for centuries, but it's a fiction. Even that one doesn't work well when they end up with 3 popes. I mean, it's limited. And that's why, when people start looking at, when you look at the British Empire, I mean, the British Empire was really, really strong, and then World War II happened. And where is the British Empire today? I mean, it still has a commonwealth, but that's more a trade kind of thing at this point and stuff like that. And so, beware lest you think your nation too will stand forever. It can fall in one night. Look at the Soviet Union and how quick. I mean, they're still trying to rebuild it. They're still working at rebuilding it back. Look at how China was going to take over the world, and then they can't handle COVID, and so they actually are declining in population at this point, which is like wow. And so the beast, historic manifestations of the beast are limited, but we have the Lamb. So we've looked at the prostitute and the beast and all of that, and we're going to come back to it. But the Lamb is in the middle of all of this, and the Lamb's followers also are described in this. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And so this beast system, the beast and any manifestation of the beast system will fight against the Lamb, Jesus, and any of Jesus' followers. I mean, they want to stamp us out. Just get that through your head. The world doesn't want us around. And they never have and never will. And so we have to learn how to live with that. And that's part of what this is about, is that all you have to do is endure. All you have to do is be faithful, because the Lamb wins. Well, the Lamb has already won. Now, notice the faithful here are the called, the chosen, and the faithful, the followers of Jesus. Faithful appears throughout the vision. These are the faithful, these are the faithful. That's throughout the vision. Called and chosen only happen here. Those are unique. And in the rest of the New Testament, the called always refers to God's action to draw people out of their separation, their alienation from God, into fellowship or covenant with God. We're called into relationship with God. That's the way it's used. And chosen tends to carry the same idea that God initiates this status. God calls us in. God chooses us to come in, but being called by God, being chosen by God isn't enough. You also have to be faithful. So there's a synergy here. God initiates the action. God calls us in. God chooses us to come in. But we have to be faithful if there's going to be a real relationship, because real relationships always require a consensus between the two parties who are in relationship. Otherwise, there's no real relationship. And so they're waging war against us, and we wage war against them. And the angel contrasts the citizenship of New Jerusalem with fallen Babylon with this explanation of the waters, which we've already looked at quickly, but we'll look at again. He said to me, "The waters which you saw, where the prostitute sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages." It's from the peoples and multitudes and nations and languages that the called and chosen and faithful come. We come out of the nations. God calls us out of fallen Babylon into New Jerusalem. So God calls us from being with the prostitute into becoming the bride. We who are called, chosen, and faithful are the evidences of the Lamb's victory over the beast. You're an evidence that Jesus has won, because you're not in fallen Babylon. So the prostitute is seen sitting on both the beast and the waters, which is, you have to remember that. It suggests the peoples, tribes, nations, and languages are those who just accompany the beast. And those who are called, chosen, and faithful, those are the ones who accompany the Lamb. And so there's there's the disciples of Satan and the disciples of Jesus in the world. Now, the disciples of Satan probably don't think of themselves as disciples of Satan, but they are. and sometimes you may not look like a disciple of Jesus, but you are, if you're called and chosen and you're faithful. And there's a warfare between the Lamb and the Beast. But the warfare of the Lamb and the Beast takes place also between the called, chosen, and faithful and the peoples, tribes, and nations and languages in the midst of the citizens of New Jerusalem and fallen Babylon. We encounter each other and there's conflict there. There's war there. Now, we don't fight war the way the world fights war. Well, we shouldn't fight war the way the world fights war. We should fight war in a different way. And John shows the mystery of how evil actually serves God's purposes. That doesn't mean God created evil, but God uses evil for his own purposes. And you see that in verses 16 and 17. The 10 horns which you saw, the beast, these will hate the prostitute. Well, now she sits on the back of him. But they'll hate the prostitute, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. And so, God doesn't need to take vindictive action against the fallen world. People have this idea of, God wanting to get those people or get this nation or get that nation. It's, I remember when there was the earthquake in Haiti, and they were saying, this is because God's cursed you because you did this and all this. And I'm thinking, where do you get that? That's not in the Bible at all. I mean, not that God hasn't done active judgment and God won't do active judgment. He does. But generally speaking, God doesn't need to act. Evil turns on itself. Evil destroys itself. He doesn't need to be vindictive or punitive or vengeful against the rebellion. The rebellion carries the seeds of its own destruction in itself. And the actions of the beast and the 10 horns, the kings, according to verse 12, show that destruction. That the leadership of the fallen world turns against the prostitute, who is the embodiment of who they are. And so the rebellious order is shaped by God's purposes such that the dynamics within itself fulfill God's purposes of destruction. It's just like someone gets caught up in sin. Their own sin starts to destroy them. Ever notice that? A drug addict, their drug addiction destroys them. Someone, you can just go down the line. I don't even need to give a lot of examples. And so the woman which you saw, the great city, Babylon, reigns over the kings of the earth. But the kings of the earth are who turn against her, but she rules over them. See, there's this internal division kind of thing. And the angel explains this woman. Rome was the historic manifestation of the reality of the vision for John in his day. If he'd have been talking to Daniel, it would have been Babylon or Persia, depending on when he gave it. And John has seen this. But John has seen that because he knows Daniel and he's described imagery that God's given him in terms of Daniel's imagery, except instead of 4 beasts that Daniel saw, John sees them all smushed up into one beast. Because he has a deeper revelation that this isn't just one bad thing and then another bad thing. It's really all one big bad thing that just pops up all the time. So this larger dimension of the fallen Babylon is seen in the great city's dominion over the kings of the earth. The vision has portrayed as this is the human community's rebellion against God. Well, when you have rebelliousness leading people, you've got chaos. So, the one having great authority. Actually, it's 20 after. That's probably a good place to stop. I'm sorry. But, it's the beginning of a new section of the text. So, rather than stop in the middle of a section of text, that's probably a good place. Do you have any questions or comments so far through this crazy talk of the prostitute sitting on the beast, founded on the beast is destroying her, but she rules over them, and all of that. Is this a hand up or just a stretch?
It's a hand up stretch.
Okay.
So you're going to summarize all this at the end, right?
Maybe.
Like high points, this is what you need to know, this is...
What you need to know is that
we live in an evil place.
That we live in the midst of evil, but we're called to be faithful in the midst of evil, and that evil is one big evil thing. It's Satan's rebellion against God, but that it manifests in different ways during different times of history. But all of those different times of history are limited in their scope because God won't allow any one empire or whatever to completely ever have control, and so it destroys it, and it has its own seeds of destruction, so it falls, and then another one comes up and it falls. And we'll see later that things like the people who control the economy and stuff like that, they typically aren't harmed by this destruction of the beast in any one history. They just wait for the next one. And you see that throughout history, that those who have all of the wealth, they just kind of sit back and wait for the next big bad ruler to come up, and then they take over. And so he's going to show us that later as well. And our job is just to be faithful. Don't get overwhelmed by all of the evil around and the things that happen. Just stick with Jesus and be faithful. That's the summary.
And it should be so easy, right?
So there's a great second chapter of Acts song where they say taking the easy way isn't an easy way.
But we can be comforted in the fact that even John made a big mistake bowing down to the angel.
Well, John's overwhelmed by the angel, and he bows down to the angel to worship him, and so God's working with fallible humans, and God knows that, and so God will correct us, and you notice that that of the descriptors of us in this particular passage, 2 of them are God oriented or God initiated, and only 1 is us. So he calls us, he chooses us, and we have to be faithful. But if we're not faithful, he still calls us and chooses us. So we can choose to be faithful again. And so while we have a role to play, we could say in this kind of sense that God does more than we do to make sure that we stay. God's going to keep us as long as we continue to look to God. Now, if you want to reject God, then all bets are off. Mm-hmm. Well, unless you're a good Calvinist, and then you couldn't reject God, or if you did, you never did accept him to begin with, which is a bunch of malarkey.
But do we not reject him when we do evil? I mean, is that not rejecting him?
Sometimes we may do evil simply because we're weak.
Yeah, but I don't think we can live our life with excuses, can we?
Well, you can't live your life with excuses, and there's a real problem if you continue to do it over and over and over. But, let's take something that's near and dear to my heart, food. But something else that's near and dear to my heart, and that's to be at a proper weight. So I am faithful and I have a motivation to eat like someone who is trim and fit. Also to exercise like someone who is trim and fit. But there are times when the weakness of my flesh stops at the refrigerator and takes out the leftover whatever, or something like that. That doesn't mean it's all over for me and that I'm destined to be a 400-pound obese person. That just means that I am human and fleshly. And the same thing is true with God. Just because you failed through the weakness of your flesh doesn't mean that God has rejected you. God's still choosing you. God's still calling you. And if you will return and be faithful, this is why he tells the disciples, when they come up to him, and in the Jewish kind of context of first century, that the standard was that if someone does something bad to you, then you need to forgive them 3 times. But if they do it a 4th time, and so they're going to Jesus, they realize that they are called to a higher standard than that. And say, so how often should we do it? In a day, even. The context later is, and they're going 7? So that's more than double the standard. I mean, that's really a high-level standard. And Jesus is going, 70 times 7. In other words, you never forget. You never quit forgiving. Ever. Now, if someone comes to you every, I figured it up, 41 seconds through the day, and does something horrible and then says, I'm sorry, and you're supposed to forgive them. There's clearly something wrong with that person, and we need to work with them to help them not do that. But that doesn't change our responsibility to be forgiving to them in an absurdly extravagant way. This is why I get so disgusted at people who say, "Oh, the United Methodist Church is beyond all repair, and so we're just going to go leave and make our own little competing denomination." It's like, what happened to 70 times 7? What happened to that? And they look at me like a frog looking at a hailstone storm, because that's foreign to them. Because they have the orthodoxy right, but they don't have the heart right. And this is going to make someone real mad because I have a few traditionalists who listen to this, who have jumped ship to the GMC. And I'm not going to say everyone who has gone to the GMC wasn't called out. I'm not going to say that. But there's a real problem there. Where is the 70 times 7? And here's the deal. If God expects you to forgive me if I do something nasty to you 490 times today and come back and ask your forgiveness, I mean, that's absurd. But if God expects you to go ahead and forgive me, how much more is God going to do that for you?
Amen.
So you are, as long as you keep turning back to, it's kind of like what I was talking about the other day in the sermon, if you heard it, where you need to spend time just connecting with God, with Jesus, and if your mind wanders and you say, "Okay, Jesus, here I am," and then your mind wanders, you say, "Okay, Jesus, here I am." Don't look at that as a failure if your mind wanders 1,000 times in an hour or something like that. Think of that as 1,000 times you were able to come to Jesus.
Or else you're just fooling yourself. You
No.
aren't coming to him anyway.
Well, I think you are, because we're just weak-minded.
Yeah.
So I figured it out. If 1,000 years is as one day to the Lord, and that guy, the eighth one, rules for just 1 hour, 24 into 1,000 comes out to 41.7 months. So I was thinking to myself, I know it's close to the 3.5 years. It's kind of
We
cool.
really need to work with you. We need to pray. You wanted to be done before 6:30, so we need to pray. This is 6:27. Dear Lord God, we thank you and we praise you for all that you teach us. And we thank you that you make it clear to us that as bad as the world is, it's been that way ever since Satan rebelled. And it's going to be that way until Satan is finally put out in the final judgment, except for a time period when he's put in lockdown or whatever. But that since Jesus died and rose again, the victory has been won, and we can live in that victory. And even though we live in it imperfectly, you're a perfect God who has called and chosen us and gives us the grace to be faithful. And when we fail to be faithful, gives us the grace to be faithful.